The desert night had a way of swallowing sound, muting even the most violent bursts of gunfire into muffled cracks that drifted across the valley. From his vantage point on a crumbling ridge, the SEAL commander adjusted the focus of his spotting scope and let his eyes sweep the barren terrain below. He was an old hand at this years of deployments, countless nights in hostile territory, and a lifetime of watching other men through glass. Patience was not a trait he had learned in training. It was burned into him through repetition and survival. Tonight, though, his patience was edged with curiosity. The mission was routine, in the way war was ever routine, high stakes, unpredictable, but framed by familiar patterns. His platoon had been tasked with supporting an Allied unit operating along the far ridge, a joint effort meant to push insurgent fighters from the valley system. He expected to see the usual. Rugged men in dusty camouflage, faces hardened by fatigue, weapons that carried the wear of long campaigns. What he did not expect was her. She crouched near the edge of a collapsed wall, framed by the glow of a dim moon. A Barrett M82A1 lay across her lap, the weapon's massive barrel glinting faintly as she ran a cloth across its surface. The commander froze, adjusting his optics to be sure his eyes weren't lying. A woman. Not just a woman holding a rifle, but a sniper's sniper, calm, deliberate, precise in the way she handled the .50 caliber monster that most men treated with either awe or fear. Her posture betrayed none of that. She didn't cradle the weapon like it was sacred, nor did she manhandle it. She treated it like an extension of herself, a tool she had mastered long ago. The commander let out a low breath, almost a laugh. In 20 years of operations, he had seen women in combat, sure, but rarely in the role of a long-range shooter. And never had he seen one command a Barrett with such natural familiarity. Through his scope, he studied her movements the way he'd study a potential target. Every adjustment of her sling, every glance at the valley floor, every subtle correction to her bipod placement, it all spoke of experience. This wasn't a rookie operator trying to prove herself. This was someone who had already proved herself, time and time again. Behind him, one of his men shifted, the crunch of gravel breaking his concentration. The commander raised a hand without looking back. Silence returned. His team trusted him, knew his instincts well enough not to question what he chose to observe. Still, he knew some of them had already noticed her too. Whispers had circulated during the approach. The Allied unit had brought in a sniper with an unusual record, though details were scarce. He had dismissed it as battlefield rumor. Soldiers loved stories of ghosts who could bend bullets, of mythical shooters who never missed. Now, staring at her steady silhouette through his glass, he wondered if those whispers carried weight. The firefight in the valley was intermittent, bursts of tracer fire lighting up the darkness as insurgents shifted positions. Mortar rounds had cratered the ground earlier, leaving the terrain scarred and jagged. The commander checked his watch, noting how long their overwatch position had been in place. They were covering an approach route, ensuring no reinforcements slipped in behind the Allied unit. It was the kind of task that demanded discipline more than heroics. And yet, he found his focus returning to her. Her helmet was tilted back slightly, night vision goggles perched, but unused, as she sighted through the massive optic mounted on her Barrett. The commander watched the way she settled her cheek weld, her breathing slowing to a measured rhythm. Even at a distance, he could sense her composure, the way she tuned out the chaos around her. She might as well have been alone in the desert, a solitary hunter waiting for prey. He remembered the first time he had seen a Barrett in use. It was years ago, in Afghanistan, when one of his men had lugged the weapon into a mountain pass to disable a vehicle convoy. The recoil had been brutal, the sound like thunder rolling through stone. Few had the discipline to shoot it well under combat stress. Yet this woman seemed unbothered, almost serene. The commander adjusted his scope again, narrowing his view to the space between her gloved hands. The Barrett's bolt action slid back with smooth precision, the spent casing tossed aside as she chambered another round. No hesitation. No wasted movement. It was the kind of efficiency that came only from endless repetition. Thousands of hours on the range and dozens of nights just like this one. She shifted slightly, leaning into her scope, and the commander followed her line of sight. Across the valley, faint heat signatures flickered near a ruined watchtower. Insurgents 2, maybe 3 moving with the jerky haste of men who knew they were exposed. The woman adjusted her angle, her breathing visible even from this distance as her chest rose and fell in slow cadence. The commander instinctively checked his own rifle, though he knew she would shoot before he ever had to. He felt the moment stretch. Not seconds, but lifetimes compressed into a breath. Then the Barrett thundered. The sound rolled across the valley, echoing like distant artillery. The commander tracked through his glass, watching the insurgent crumple in a spray of dust and blood. The others scattered, one tripping in panic as they vanished behind the ruined tower. She didn't flinch, didn't even shift her position. She simply ejected the casing, chambered another round, and returned her eye to the scope. The commander leaned back from his spotting scope, exhaling. He had seen snipers take good shots before. He had seen lucky hits at long ranges, even miraculous ones. But there was something different about the way she fired. It wasn't luck. It wasn't even skill in the ordinary sense. It was inevitability. He let the silence settle over him, the valley returning to its uneasy rhythm of sporadic gunfire. Behind him, one of his men muttered something under his breath, too soft to catch. The commander didn't ask. He knew they were all thinking the same thing. Who was she? He pulled the spotting scope back to her position, studying her face in the dim glow of the moon. She had the look of someone who had carried a weapon far too long, the calm mask of a professional who knew exactly what she was capable of. For now, she was just another ally in the night, working the same mission, watching the same valley. But the commander's instincts told him there was more to her than what he had just witnessed. A story lay behind those steady eyes, one written not in rumors, but in blood and distance. He did not yet know the number that would attach itself to her legend, but soon he would. The night wore on, and the commander's focus did not waver. Years in the field had taught him how to divide his mind, one part tracking radio chatter, one part reading the terrain for threats, and always another watching the people around him. That instinct was what had kept him alive when younger men with quicker reflexes had fallen. It was also what kept his attention on the woman across the valley. Through the green wash of night optics, her form was etched in delicate lines. She looked almost statuesque behind the Barrett .50, but her stillness was deceptive. He noticed the small adjustments, the way her right elbow inched back into the dirt, a micro tilt of her head to cut down glare, the half-breath pause before she shifted her bipod a hair's width to the left. Each movement was economical, purposeful. This wasn't showmanship. This was the language of mastery. The commander had seen all types of shooters. There were the raw naturals, whose instincts made up for lack of discipline. There were the grinders, men who bled hours on the range until their bodies obeyed without thought. And then there were the very few who transcended both categories. Those shooters became something else, a breed apart. They didn't just fire a weapon. They communed with it. Watching her, he knew which category she belonged to. Behind him, Petty Officer Gaines whispered, "Sir, you seeing this?" The commander didn't turn. Quiet, but he had caught the awe in Gaines's tone. It mirrored his own thoughts. Every man in the Overwatch team had eyes on her now, even if they pretended otherwise. Soldiers recognized greatness when they saw it, and though pride sometimes kept them silent, curiosity always burned. The firefight below had ebbed into uneasy silence. The insurgents had pulled back, wary after the devastating hit from the Barrett. Still, the woman did not relax. She kept her cheek pressed to the stock, scanning sectors with the slow precision of a machine. Her trigger finger rested outside the guard, disciplined, unmoving. The commander respected that most of all. In the field, restraint often spoke louder than aggression. He adjusted his spotting scope again, curious about her face. The faint light revealed sharp features beneath the helmet strap, eyes narrowed in concentration. There was no visible sign of strain. She looked as calm as if she were studying a painting in a museum, not hunting men in the dark. That composure was rare, even among the SEALs he commanded. Something tugged at his memory. Years ago, during a deployment in Mosul, he had watched a Marine scout sniper take a shot across 1.5 kilometers of rubble. The young man had been shaking with nerves afterward, his adrenaline so high he could barely reload. That had been a good shot legendary, even for the conditions. But what stuck in the commander's mind was the trembling. The body betrayed what the mind tried to master. This woman, though, betrayed nothing. She was ice. As he studied her, another operator slid up beside her position, a lean figure with the gait of someone used to combat stress. They exchanged no words, only a nod. The commander recognized that kind of partnership. It spoke of trust, of time spent in the field together. Whoever she was no lone wolf. She was part of a system, one that had clearly adapted to her presence. The radio in the commander's ear crackled with a report from the Allied unit. Movement on the far ridge. He relayed the coordinates, then instinctively glanced back at her. She had already shifted, aligning her massive rifle with the new sector. Through his scope, he saw her lips part slightly as she steadied her breathing. She held her position, waiting, patient as the desert wind whispered across the rocks. Then, almost lazily, she adjusted her dope click, 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 each dial on her scope tuned with the certainty of someone who didn't guess. She knew, and the commander felt a shiver crawl up his spine. It wasn't fear. It was recognition, the recognition of someone watching an apex predator. He had led men into countless firefights, had survived ambushes, raids, and sieges. He had seen death handed out in every form. But rarely had he seen death personified so quietly. The woman fired again. This time he didn't bother tracking the target. He tracked her. The way her shoulders absorbed the recoil, the way her left hand steadied the foregrip without flinch, the way she rolled back into position before the dust of the shot had even settled. Flawless. Jesus, Gaines muttered. The commander didn't silence him this time. He only nodded, still watching. He thought of the whispers again, the rumors that had floated through the briefing room before the mission. Stories of an Allied sniper with a record shot, so improbable it sounded like a fairy tale. He had dismissed it as myth, the kind of storyboard soldiers passed along in the barracks to make war seem like legend instead of grind. But now, staring through his glass at the woman with the Barrett, he wasn't so sure. There was something in the way she carried herself, something that told him this was not her first impossible shot, nor would it be her last. Her reputation, whatever it was, hadn't been built on luck. The commander leaned back, stretching his shoulders against the ache of the ridge. He kept his voice low as he keyed his mic. "Stay sharp, boys. We're watching history out here, whether you know it or not." He hadn't meant to say it out loud, but the silence that followed told him his men agreed. The valley slept uneasily, waiting for the next exchange of fire. The commander knew the battle would continue before dawn. He also knew that somewhere in the dark, insurgents were whispering about the monster weapon that had found them, and the ghostly shooter who wielded it. They didn't know it was a woman. They didn't know her legend had already been carved in steel and distance. But the commander was beginning to suspect. And with every shot she took, every measured movement, every breath that carried calm into chaos, his suspicion grew into certainty. This was no ordinary sniper. This was someone extraordinary, someone whose name, though still unknown to him, would one day stand among the greatest marksmen who had ever lived. The silence in the valley was fragile, like glass stretched too thin. The SEAL commander felt it in his bones, the tension that always came before an eruption. Through the green haze of his optics, he saw insurgents regrouping at the far end of the ruins, shadows darting between jagged stone and broken towers. They were bold men, desperate or foolish, but they weren't done yet. The commander adjusted his scope, narrowing in on the cluster of figures. He counted 4, maybe 5. They moved with intent, carrying what looked like a heavy tube slung across 2 shoulders. Mortar. His stomach tightened. If they set that up, they could rain hell on both the Allied unit and his team's position. He reached for his radio. Eyes on enemy mortar prep. 200 meters past the tower, grid marker. But before he finished, the faint crunch of gravel shifted his attention back to her. The woman with the Barrett had already spotted the threat. She moved with startling swiftness, swinging the massive rifle into place, her body rolling flat against the dirt. The commander's words died on his tongue. He stayed silent, watching. Her partner beside her slipped a range card into her hand. She glanced once, nodded, and began dialing her scope. Each click of elevation carried through the night like the winding of a clock toward destiny. The commander tracked her every move through his spotting scope, his heart rate sinking to her rhythm. She exhaled slowly once, twice. Then her hand brushed the trigger guard. He followed her line of sight. The insurgents had almost reached cover. One man bent low, adjusting the mortar base plate, his back turned to her. It was a small, fleeting window, one she didn't hesitate to seize. The Barrett roared. The recoil sent a ripple through the air, dust pluming around her as the rifle cracked like thunder across the valley. The commander snapped his eye to the target zone, just in time to see the insurgent collapse, body folding unnaturally as the others scattered in panic. The mortar baseplate clattered into the dirt, forgotten. But she wasn't done. Without pause, she racked the bolt, ejected the shell, and reacquired her sight picture. The commander marveled at her speed. The Barrett wasn't a rifle you rushed. It was a beast that demanded respect. Yet she handled it like a precision instrument, chambering the next round with smooth inevitability. Another shot thundered, and another insurgent went down. The remaining fighters broke, sprinting into the dark, abandoning their weapon. She didn't chase them. She let them run, her finger resting lightly along the frame. It was discipline, the kind that separated a killer from a soldier. The objective wasn't numbers. It was control. The commander leaned back, exhaling through clenched teeth. His team had seen plenty of kills before, plenty of firefights that ended with men down and others fleeing. But this felt different. There was something almost surgical about it, like watching a scalpel slice through chaos with perfect certainty. Behind him, Gaines whispered again. 2 shots, 2 confirmed. That's insane, sir. The commander didn't answer. His mind was busy replaying what he had just witnessed. It wasn't just accuracy. It wasn't even just range. It was the composure, the confidence. She hadn't rushed, hadn't second-guessed. She had trusted her skill, her rifle, and the math running silently in her head. The battlefield shifted in an instant. Where moments ago insurgents prepared to unleash destruction, now there was nothing but dust, silence, and fear scattered into the night. And it had taken her less than 30 seconds to tilt the balance. The commander keyed his mic. Mortar threat neutralized. Courtesy of Allied sniper team. Even as he spoke, his tone carried something it rarely did: wonder. He kept his eyes on her, unable to look away. She had already settled back into Overwatch, scanning the terrain for the next threat. To her, it was just another engagement, another task executed with precision. To him, it was something else entirely. He had led elite men into combat, had seen the best shooters in the Navy work miracles with their rifles. But in all those years, he had never seen death delivered with such inevitability. Something stirred in his memory again, the rumor whispered before deployment. A shot so far, it sounded like myth. A distance so impossible, it bent the mind. He remembered laughing it off with his men, saying no one alive could push the limits of physics that far. But watching her work now, he began to doubt his own dismissal. Could it be true? Could this calm, deliberate figure before him be the one behind that record-breaking shot? The commander's eyes flicked back to her rifle. The Barrett was designed for long range, yes, but not for the kind of distances soldiers bragged about over beers. At least, not for ordinary hands. Yet she handled it as if it were a paintbrush and the desert her canvas. He rubbed at his jaw, unsettled. The battlefield didn't often surprise him anymore. He had grown used to patterns, to men fighting and dying in ways he could predict. But she was different. She shifted the entire equation. And as he watched her lower the Barrett for a moment, tilting her head back to let the cool night air rush across her face, he realized something else. She wasn't chasing glory. She wasn't performing for anyone. This was simply her way of existing. To her, the rifle wasn't a symbol. It was a heartbeat, steady and unyielding. The commander felt something rare admiration blooming into humility. In war, ego was as deadly as any bullet. But standing witness to her skill, he felt no urge to measure himself against her. Instead, he felt gratitude. Gratitude that she was on his side, that her crosshairs weren't aligned with him. "Sir?" Gaines asked softly. "Orders?" The commander blinked, realizing his men were waiting. He straightened, voice firm again. "Stay alert. We've got an asset out there who just bought us breathing room. Let's not waste it." But as his men returned to their scans, the commander lingered a moment longer, his scope still fixed on her. The shot had changed everything. Not just for the battle, but for him. Because in that thunderous crack across the valley, he had glimpsed something more than war. He had glimpsed legend being written in real time. And though he didn't yet know the number 3,247 meters, he suspected he was staring at the woman who had etched it into history. The battlefield had changed tone. What was once a steady rhythm of small arms and bursts of machine gun fire now settled into something quieter, as though the valley itself was holding its breath. The commander had felt that shift before. It was the moment when one side realized it had been outmatched, and the fight bled out of them before they even broke contact. The insurgents had lost their mortar team. That wasn't just firepower removed, it was hope ripped away. Without it, they had no way to challenge the Overwatch positions, no tool to tilt the balance back in their favor. And worse for them, they had seen what killed their men, not just the Barrett's devastating punch, but the unerring certainty of its operator. The commander leaned back against the ridge wall, letting his shoulders press into the cool stone. His men were busy scanning their arcs, reporting small movements on the radio, but none of them spoke much. The silence wasn't just tactical. It was reverent. Everyone who had witnessed her work carried the same thought. They had just seen something extraordinary. He looked again through his spotting scope, unable to stop himself. She had shifted her body slightly, resting on her side as her partner checked their gear. They spoke in low tones he couldn't hear, but he could tell by their gestures and calm demeanor that they were reviewing the engagement, confirming kills, updating range cards. Professionalism in its purest form. No fist bumps. No grins. just quiet acknowledgement of work done well. That, more than the shots themselves, impressed him. In his years of leading SEALs, he had seen men lose control after successful missions, laughing too loud, letting adrenaline spill into reckless bravado. It was human, but it was also dangerous. Those who could keep their emotions bridled, those who treated success and failure with equal restraint, were the ones who lasted longest in the field. She was one of those. The commander rubbed at the stubble on his chin, thoughtful. He wondered what kind of career lay behind her. No one became this good overnight. It wasn't training alone. It was scars, repetition, nights of failure that honed a shooter into legend. He'd seen snipers struggle with wind, elevation, target movement. He'd seen good men make bad calls because fatigue dulled their edge. But from the way she moved, he suspected she had faced all of it, conquered it, and folded the lessons into her bones. A voice broke over the radio. An allied officer, his accent thick, sounded both relieved and curious. Overwatch, we copy mortar threat neutralized. Who took the shot? The commander hesitated. He could have answered, claimed the credit for his team's coordination. That was common in joint operations. Blur the lines, present a united front. But something in him resisted. He keyed his mic. Allied Sniper Team, Ridge West. Barrett 50. Clean work. There was a pause. Then the voice came back, quieter, almost deferential. Understood. Thank them for us. The commander glanced again through his scope. He didn't need to thank her. She wasn't the type who fired for gratitude. Still, he felt a strange pull, a need to acknowledge what she'd done, not just as another operator, but as a peer who understood the weight of mastery. He remembered the way her shots had cracked the night, how the recoil had rolled off her like nothing, how her second round had come as naturally as breathing. 2 men dead, a mortar silenced, a valley saved. And she had done it without fanfare. One of his younger men, Petty Officer Daniels, whispered just loud enough for the team to hear. She's not human. No way. I've never seen shooting like that. The commander shot him a look. Not harsh, but pointed. She's human. Just better trained than most. Don't start thinking myths. That's how you underestimate people. Daniel swallowed and nodded, returning to his scope. But the awe didn't fade from his face. The truth was, the commander understood the sentiment. It wasn't about deifying her. It was about recognizing a level of control that felt superhuman. Yet he forced himself to keep perspective. He knew what myths did to soldiers. They created expectations no one could live up to, and in battle, those expectations could kill. Still, he couldn't deny it. There was something legendary in the way she worked. As the night deepened, sporadic gunfire echoed in the distance, but the valley directly ahead remained subdued. The enemy had been rattled. The commander knew they'd regroup eventually, maybe try again under cover of dawn. For now, though, there was calm. He shifted position, crawling along the ridge until he had a clearer line on her. His scope caught the faint outline of her hands as she methodically cleaned the Barrett, wiping dust from the chamber, checking the scope mount. Ritual, he realized. She was resetting her weapon, preparing it for the next moment without assumption. That was another mark of a true professional, never assuming the last shot would be the last. Her partner leaned in, said something that made her nod once. Then she glanced up toward the commander's ridge. He froze, realizing her eyes were scanning in his direction. For a fleeting second, he felt caught, as though she could see straight through the magnification of his glass. She gave the smallest of acknowledgments, a dip of her chin, barely perceptible. The commander found himself smiling, despite the grimness of their situation. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't challenge. It was recognition, from one warrior to another. Behind him, Gaines whispered, "She just looked our way, sir." You think she knows we're watching? Of course she does, the commander replied softly. Good snipers always know. He let the scope drop, resting his eyes for a moment. The desert wind tugged at his gear, carrying with it the smell of spent powder and scorched sand. He felt strangely honored, like he'd just been included in a circle far smaller than most soldiers ever glimpsed. This wasn't just another allied shooter. This was someone operating at the outer edge of human ability. And he was starting to realize that his men weren't the only ones watching with respect. He was too. He tapped his radio again, this time speaking quietly to his team. Take a good look tonight, boys. What you're seeing out here, you won't see twice in a lifetime. He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. The silence that followed wasn't just tactical discipline, it was awe wrapped in humility. For the rest of the night, as the valley held its uneasy peace, the commander couldn't shake the image of her steady hands on the Barrett, the inevitability of her shots, the way she had tipped the balance of battle without so much as raising her voice. Recognition had settled in, undeniable and sharp. He didn't yet know her story, didn't yet know the number that defined her legend. But he knew enough. She was no rumor. She was real. And she had just carved her presence into the memory of every man who had seen her fire. Dawn crept into the valley like a thief, painting the horizon in faint strokes of pale orange and blue. The commander had always hated this hour, the space between night and day when men were most tired, when mistakes slipped through cracks and the enemy struck hardest. His team rotated positions, eyes burning from fatigue, but discipline held. No one complained. He scanned the Allied position again, his optics catching the faint glimmer of the Barrett's barrel as the woman adjusted her gear. She hadn't slept. Not once. She had remained prone through the night, eyes in her scope, partner at her side. It was the kind of endurance that broke most soldiers. Yet she looked unshaken, her movements as deliberate as they had been hours ago. The radio crackled, pulling his attention away. An Allied officer requested a short coordination meet face-to-face. Normally, such meetings were rare during live operations, but the battlefield had shifted, and both units needed to recalibrate their roles. The commander gave the order. They'd move. By the time his boots touched the valley floor, the sun had begun to crawl over the ridge, heat pressing down like an invisible hand. He led his small group across the scarred ground, rifles ready, eyes scanning every shadow. The insurgents had withdrawn for now, but trust was never a luxury in war. The Allied unit was dug in among the ruins of an old stone compound. Men greeted them with curt nods, weary but alert. And then he saw her up close for the first time. She stood near the shattered wall, Barrett slung across her chest as if it weighed nothing. Dust streaked her uniform, sweat clung to her brow, but her eyes sharp, steady, and possibly calm met his without hesitation. The commander felt something stir in him. Respect, yes, but also curiosity sharpened into a need. He had questions, and he wanted answers. Introductions were made quickly, names and ranks exchanged, hands shaken in the briefest gestures. Formalities had no place here. Once the officers peeled away to discuss maps and movements, the commander found himself lingering near her. "You took those shots, Knight," he said. Not a question. She gave a single nod. Targets presented themselves. Couldn't let the mortar fire. Her voice was quiet, measured. No arrogance, no weight of self-importance. Just fact. The commander studied her face, the lines etched by years of work, the focus that never seemed to fade. He had seen men break under far less strain. She looked like she could shoulder the war, alone if she had to. "I've seen good shooting before," he admitted. "But nothing like that," she shrugged, adjusting the sling of her rifle. "It's my job," it was an answer, but not the whole story. He could feel it. Soldiers who lived on the edge of myth never spoke in full truths. They carried pieces of themselves like classified files, only opening them when trust was earned. Her partner approached, a wiry man with a scar across his cheek. He glanced between them, then smirked faintly. "You've heard the stories, haven't you?" The commander raised an eyebrow. "What stories?" The partner chuckled, shaking his head. "Don't play dumb. Word travels. Everyone wants to know if the rumors are true." The commander's curiosity burned hotter. He turned back to her. "Rumors?" For the first time, a flicker of something crossed her face, not annoyance, not pride, but resignation, as though she had walked this path before. She gave a small sigh. "There's no point hiding it anymore. They keep telling it, whether I want them to or not." He waited, silent, letting the moment stretch. Finally, she met his eyes. 3,247 meters. Confirmed. The commander's breath caught. He had expected a number, maybe even a long one. But hearing it spoken aloud was different. It hit him like a blow, echoing in his mind. 3,247. Nearly 2 miles. "That's impossible," one of his younger men blurted. Her partner gave a sharp look. "Not impossible. Verified. Ask the record keepers." The commander said nothing at first. He was replaying every shot he had ever seen, every impossible distance he had ever doubted, and stacking them against the number she had just spoken. He thought of wind, of spindrift, of Coriolis effect twisting a bullet across that kind of distance. He thought of the heartbeat it took to squeeze a trigger, and how much the world could change in that heartbeat. And yet, she had done it. He studied her again, this time not as a soldier assessing another operator, but as a man staring at living, proof that human limits were further than he had believed. She didn't look like a legend. She looked like a soldier. That was the strangest part of all. "How?" he asked softly. Her gaze didn't waver. Preparation. A good team. Luck on the wind. And patience. Patience. The word lingered. The commander knew snipers preached it, but here it felt different. Patience wasn't just waiting. Patience was faith that the shot would come, that the target would step into alignment, that every factor beyond control would eventually balance if one simply endured. His men shifted uneasily, digesting what they had heard. Some looked skeptical, others awed. The commander let them wrestle with it. He, however, felt only clarity. The shot wasn't myth. The shot was real. And the woman before him was its author. She must have seen the change in his face, because she gave the smallest of nods, acknowledging his understanding. For the rest of the briefing, the commander listened half-heartedly to talk of patrol routes and supply drops. His thoughts kept circling back to her. A number, a record, a legend hidden inside flesh and blood. He tried to imagine what it must feel like to carry that reputation, to know that your name was whispered in barracks and briefing rooms as something larger than life. But she carried it lightly, almost reluctantly. When the meeting ended, she hoisted the Barrett again, ready to return to her post. The commander found himself speaking before he could stop. "You've changed how I see the battlefield." She paused, glanced back at him. Her eyes softened, just slightly. "No, the battlefield doesn't change. We just learn how to read it better." Then she was gone, climbing the rubble to resume overwatch, leaving him with the echo of her words and the weight of her record. The commander stood there for a long time, the morning sun warming the dust on his face. He had seen history once before, men storming compounds, flags raised after brutal victories, moments captured in headlines. But this felt different. This wasn't history for the world. This was history for soldiers, the kind passed in hushed voices, carried like sacred scripture. 3,247 meters. And he had just looked into the eyes of the one who made it real. The camp settled into the uneasy rhythm of soldiers in temporary safety. Fires flickered in small cans, boiling water for instant coffee. Radios whispered, boots scuffed gravel, and somewhere in the distance, the dull hum of drones circled like mechanical vultures. The commander sat apart from his men, rolling a spent cartridge between his fingers, but his eyes kept drifting to her silhouette, perched on the broken wall. She sat with the Barrett balanced across her lap, silent, distant. There was something in her posture, not just discipline, but weight. He recognized it. The kind of weight only carried by those who had walked long, brutal roads. When her partner approached him later, carrying 2 battered mugs of coffee, the commander wasn't surprised. The man set one down in front of him. "She doesn't talk much about it," the partner said. "But you're not the first to ask." The commander studied him, then took the mug. "She doesn't strike me as someone who asks for the spotlight." "Spotlight?" The partner gave a short laugh. "She hates it. But she earned every word of those stories you've been hearing." The commander let the silence stretch. He knew better than to pry directly. Soldiers opened their history in their own time, or not at all. Still, the partner seemed willing, and so he listened. "She started young," the partner began, his voice dropping low. "Grew up on the edge of nowhere, where hunting wasn't sport, it was survival. Her father taught her rifles before she was 10. By 12, she could drop a deer from 600 yards. She said she learned to breathe with the earth itself. No rush, just patience." The commander nodded slowly. That explained her calm, her unshakable poise. She joined the service when she was barely old enough to sign the papers. Nobody thought much of her at first. Small, quiet, a woman in a world where men thought they owned the long gun. But she outlasted them all. Outshot them too. The commander thought of his own training days, the arrogance of young men certain of their superiority. He could imagine how they underestimated her, and how quickly they must have regretted it. "She trained with everyone," the partner continued. "Special units, allied programs, private schools for extreme long range. She soaked it up like a sponge. While others went to the bar, she went back to the range. While others slept, she ran calculations in notebooks. Wind charts, spin drift corrections, environmental readings. She studied it until it was muscle memory." He paused, sipping his coffee. "That's what made her different. For most, sniping is 90% patience and 10% luck. For her, the luck part shrank. She turned it into science. And when science wasn't enough, she leaned on instinct. Deadly combination. The commander could picture it. The way she had moved, the way her eye never left the scope, the way she had squeezed the trigger without hesitation. Every detail fit. "And the record?" he asked finally. The partner's expression hardened. That day, it wasn't glory. It was survival. The commander leaned forward slightly. He could hear it in the man's voice. This was a story carried like a scar. "We were pinned," the partner said. "A platoon caught in a valley. Enemy dug in on the high ground. Mortar, machine guns, everything raining down. We couldn't move. Couldn't breathe without drawing fire. Command was hours away from sending air, and by then, we'd have been nothing but smoke and names on a wall." His jaw tightened. She didn't flinch. Crawled to a ridge no one else dared to touch. She laid there for hours, tracking a spotter and gunner who thought they were untouchable. Rangefinder kept flashing numbers so big, I thought the battery was broken. 3,247. We laughed at it, said the bullet would die of old age before it landed. But she didn't laugh. The commander's chest tightened. He knew what came next, but hearing it painted with detail made it different. She adjusted, recalculated, waited. I swear she breathed maybe once an hour. Then she fired. And we watched that man crumple like the hand of God had touched him. Seconds later, his gunner went down. The ridge went silent. We moved. We lived. That shot saved 40 men, maybe more. The partner's voice cracked faintly, though his face stayed hard. That's what people don't get. It wasn't about the number. It wasn't about being in a record book. It was about us walking out alive. The commander sat back, the cartridge in his hand suddenly heavier. He understood now. Legends weren't forged for glory. They were born of necessity, shaped by moments when the world demanded something impossible and one person delivered. Later that night, he found her by the wall again. The moonlight caught her profile, sharp against the dark sky. For a while, he said nothing. Then, quietly, your partner told me the story. Her eyes flicked to him, unreadable. He shouldn't have. Maybe not. But I needed to hear it. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You saved lives that day. You save them still. Records aside, that's what matters. She was silent for a long moment, then finally said, records fade. Wars end. All that's left is the question, did you keep your people alive? That's the only ledger worth keeping. The commander nodded slowly. It was the answer of someone who had stared too long into the scope of life and death, who understood the true currency of war. They didn't speak further. They didn't need to. As the night stretched on, the commander realized something else. Stories like hers weren't just about awe. They were about perspective. Soldiers could forget why they fought, why they endured. But then a story like hers rose among them, reminding them that even in the darkest corners, greatness could shine, not because someone wanted to be a legend, but because someone refused to let others fall. He turned back toward his men, their laughter faint against the rumble of distant artillery. And he carried her story with him, not as myth, not as rumor, but as truth. For the rest of his career, he would never look through a scope the same way again. A desert night always seemed louder after a firefight. Every sound carried farther, the crunch of gravel under boots, the metallic click of a rifle bolt, the hushed murmurs between tired men. The commander lay awake on his cot, inside the battered compound, the ceiling above him nothing more than tarp stretched across broken beams. He should have been asleep. Tomorrow would demand more of him. But sleep would not come. Instead, his thoughts circled her. He had spent 2 decades in uniform. He had led men into fire, married brothers, stared death in the face, and spit back. He thought he had seen every kind of warrior. The reckless kind who burned bright and fast. The steady kind who carried others on their backs. The cold, calculating killers who lived only for the mission. But this woman defied the categories. She was a paradox, humble yet legendary, soft-spoken yet terrifying in precision. What struck him most wasn't the number 3,247 meters. Numbers were sterile. What struck him was the way she carried it. Without bravado, without hunger for recognition. As though the record belonged not to her, but to the men it had saved. That was something he had never witnessed in such pure form. At dawn, he rose and walked the perimeter. Dust clung to his boots, air sharp with the faint tong of burned cordite from yesterday's skirmish. He found her again, where he expected on the wall, Barrett across her knees, eyes scanning the ridgelines. She looked as though she had been carved into the stone, a fixture older than the war itself. He climbed up beside her, settling into the dirt with a grunt. For a while, neither spoke. The silence was companionable, the kind only soldiers understood, the silence that acknowledged both exhaustion and vigilance. Finally, he said, "You know, in my line of work, respect usually comes with rank." She didn't look at him. "And what do you think of that?" "I think it's a system that works. Most of the time. But sometimes, you meet someone who rewrites the rules. He glanced at her. You're one of them. Her mouth curved, but only faintly. Respect isn't about rewriting rules. It's about consistency. Doing what has to be done, every single time. People noticed that. He thought about that. In his career, he had seen men pull off miracles once, maybe twice. But sustaining it, living it, that was rarer than diamonds. And she was proof. You ever think about what it means, he asked, to carry that reputation? To know every sniper in the free world whispers your name? This time she turned, meeting his gaze directly. Her eyes were steel. Reputation is noise. Respect comes from those who watch you work. The ones beside you, not the ones telling stories in barracks thousands of miles away. He felt the words strike deep. He had always believed respect was something you demanded through authority, through decisions made under fire. But she framed it differently. Respect wasn't demanded, it was observed, earned quietly, not spoken but felt. He thought back to the first moment he had watched her through his own scope. The steadiness, the patience, the single shot that scattered the enemy line. He hadn't respected her then, not truly. He had admired her skill, yes, but respect had been cautious, conditional. Now it was different. Now it was absolute. Later that morning, his men prepped their gear, readying for another movement toward the valley's edge. He caught snippets of their talk banter, complaints, nervous jokes. And woven between, he heard her name. They didn't say much, but the tone told him everything. Reverence, not of the fearful kind, but of the solid, grounding kind. She had earned it without trying. As they set out, the commander walked beside her for a stretch. His men fanned out ahead, scanning rooftops and alleys, weapons angled. The city ruins loomed around them, sun beating mercilessly. You've changed something in them, he said quietly. She glanced at him. In who? My men? They walk a little taller today. Laugh a little easier. They saw what you did. They know you're out here with them. That matters more than you think. She shrugged, eyes never leaving the windows above. If it helps them survive, good. But don't mistake me for anything more than what I am. And what's that? A soldier. Same as you. But he knew it wasn't true, not entirely. She was more, and she knew it. The humility wasn't false, but it wasn't blindness either. She had chosen to frame herself as equal, because she understood what it meant to the men who needed her to be human, not myth. By midday, they halted at an abandoned market, broken stalls littered with rusted cans and sun-bleached tarps. The men collapsed in shade where they could find it, rifles across laps, helmets tipped forward. The commander sat across from her, watching as she stripped the Barrett with meticulous care, cleaning it piece by piece. Each motion was reverent, like a priest tending relics. Ever think about stopping? He asked suddenly. She paused, looking up. Stopping? Walking away. Leaving the rifle behind. No more records, no more battlefields. Her hands lingered on the polished steel of the bolt. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, softly, every time I pull this trigger, I think about stopping. Every single time. But then the next fight comes, and someone needs me. And stopping isn't an option. The commander leaned back, letting the truth of her words settle. He knew the feeling. Leaders carried the same burden, always thinking about stepping away, never able to, because too many depended on them. That was respect, too. Not the respect you gave, but the respect you lived, the kind that came with responsibility you couldn't lay down. As the day wore on, he found himself studying her not as a sniper, not even as a comrade, but as a mirror. She reflected back the essence of what soldiering was meant to be: sacrifice without fanfare, mastery without arrogance, loyalty without demand. And in that reflection, he found something in himself rekindled. That night, when the camp settled again into its restless rhythm, the commander sat with his men, listening to their laughter and low voices. He realized something he hadn't in years. He was proud, not just of them, but of himself, of the path he had walked to bring him here, to this moment where he could sit beside warriors like her and know he belonged. Respect, he thought, wasn't just about what others gave you. It was about what you allowed yourself to feel again, even after years of hardness. She had reminded him of that. And as he watched her once more take her silent place on the wall, rifle in hand, eyes unblinking, he knew one thing for certain. He would carry the lesson for the rest of his life. Even among the best, respect was never owed, it was earned. The convoy was ready before dawn, engines growling low, headlights taped over to cut their glow. Dust swirled around the compound as the team strapped gear, checked weapons, and slung packs heavy with supplies. The commander adjusted his helmet, scanning his men one last time. They moved with a sharpness he admired. Fatigue etched their faces, but discipline carried their bodies. His eyes drifted to her again. She stood near the gate, Barrett slung casually across her shoulder, as though it weighed less than a carbine. She wasn't joining the convoy. Her unit had orders to remain, hold the valley, and keep overwatch while his SEALs pushed deeper into enemy territory. He should have been used to partings by now. Soldiers crossed paths, fought side by side, and separated again, like rivers dividing at the delta. But something about this one lodged itself in his chest. She caught his stare and gave a small nod. Not a farewell, not a salute, just acknowledgement, a warrior's gesture. As the engines roared louder, the commander walked over. His boots crunched, the gravel, each step heavy with the knowledge that he might never see her again. "You'll hold this ground," he said, though it wasn't a question. She adjusted the rifle on her shoulder, lips curling in the faintest smile. Always. He studied her for a moment, memorizing the lines of her face, the steadiness of her eyes. Then softly, "Men like me. We've spent careers thinking we understood what mastery looks like. You've shown me we were wrong." Her expression didn't change, but her eyes softened. Respect isn't about shots fired or records kept. It's about who walks away because you did your job. That's all it's ever been. He felt the words settle deep, heavy and grounding. "Still," he said, "when they tell the stories, they'll speak of you." She shook her head slightly. "Let them. Stories don't matter. What matters is the lives they don't know were saved." The commander wanted to argue, to tell her she deserved more, that her humility didn't erase her legend, but he stopped himself. She didn't want the pedestal. She wanted the mission. And that, more than anything, cemented his respect. The order came over the radio time to move. He extended a hand. She clasped it firmly, grip strong, steady as the heartbeat of war itself. Then she turned, walking back toward the broken wall, climbing to her perch. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The convoy rolled out, tires grinding against the rocky road, engines rattling metal and bone. Dust rose, shrouding the compound until it disappeared into the morning haze. The commander leaned against the side of his vehicle, staring through the open window at the ridge. He knew she was up there, rifle resting, eye pressed to the scope, already searching the horizon for threats unseen. Hours passed as they drove deeper into the wasteland, sun climbing higher, heat suffocating. The men dozed between bursts of chatter, but the commander remained awake, thoughts circling the woman they'd left behind. He could see her in his mind, steady, patient, eternal. That night, when the team bivouacked in another ruin, he sat apart, journal in hand. He didn't usually write much. His entries were often terse, reduced to coordinates, names, fragments of orders. But that night, the words came freely, saw her work, saw what patience, discipline, and courage look like in their purest form. not a myth, not a rumor. A soldier who has carried the weight of saving lives farther than most will ever imagine. She will never ask for recognition. She will never speak of it herself. But I will not forget. He closed the journal, pressing a hand against the cover as though sealing something sacred. The days bled into weeks, missions stacking one atop another. The enemy pushed, the SEALs pushed back. Lives were lost and saved in the endless cycle of war. But through it all, he carried her with him. In quiet moments before dawn, he saw her silhouette against the wall. In firefights, he imagined her, calm voice whispering patience, reminding him that respect wasn't noise, but action. Months later, when his deployment ended, the commander flew home. He returned to the familiar rhythm of briefings, drills, and ceremonies. His men rotated out, replaced by others. The war ground on without them. Yet in every conversation with fellow officers, in every lecture he gave to new recruits, he found himself telling a story. Not with names, not with exaggeration, but with reverence. There was a sniper, he would say. Not one of ours, but allied. She carried a Barrett 50 like it was nothing. And when the time came, she made the impossible look ordinary. Not for glory, for survival, for her people. That's what respect looks like. Some would nod, wide-eyed, absorbing the lesson. Others would smirk, doubting the tale, the way soldiers often do when stories sound too much like legend. He never corrected them. He didn't care if they believed. He cared only that the respect lived on, because he knew. He had seen it. Years later, long after his hair had grayed and the weight of command had settled into his bones, he would sit on his porch in the quiet hours before dawn and think of her. He would see the desert, smell the dust, feel the sun burning down. And in his mind, she was always there on the wall, rifle balanced, eyes searching the horizon. He never learned where she went after that deployment. Perhaps she stayed in the fight. Perhaps she faded into the civilian world, anonymous once more. But to him, she would always be the sniper with the record that defied belief. The one who taught him that true respect had nothing to do with rank or reputation. It was about constancy. It was about sacrifice. It was about the quiet strength of a soldier who carried the weight of others and asked for nothing in return. As the sun rose on those mornings, he would whisper the number to himself, not for glory, not for awe, but as a prayer. 3,247. The distance between death and survival. The distance between myth and reality. The distance that had shown him what it truly meant to respect another warrior. And though the world might forget her name, he never did.